Hey, I'm Carter. Let's talk about books. Seeing as it's almost the end of February 2024, I thought now would be a perfect time to talk about my favorite books from 2023. Better late than never, I guess. This video is going to be my top 10 favorite reads in 2023. These will be books that I read last year, not necessarily that were published in 2023. And after we get to the runner-up, and before we get to my number one favorite read in 2023, we're going to take a little detour to do some category awards. There were some books that didn't quite make the top 10, but they deserve some special recognition. Let's start out with number 10, The Great Escape by Saket Soni. When you hear the phrase human trafficking, I think a lot of people think of minors and people who are being trafficked for sex work, but actually one of the largest categories of human trafficking is forced labor. Saket Soni was an organizer before he was an author, and The Great Escape is the story of how he came to know this large group of Indian migrants who were forced to work in the Gulf after Hurricane Katrina repairing oil derricks. It is a remarkably good story. Soni is a great storyteller. He was there, so he has this immediacy to his recollections, but he also did a lot of reporting. He talked to surviving people from that time on both sides of the equation, migrants who escaped from this forced labor camp, as well as one of the guards who ran the place. That's the pretty remarkable chapter when he gets in touch with one of these guys who has dementia and was able to talk with him before he died. The Great Escape is about one of the largest incidents of human trafficking in U.S. history, and I think basically no one knows about it. It's a remarkably good book, and I highly recommend it. I think a lot more people should be aware of this book and read it. Number 9 is, in fact, Gideon the Ninth. I don't know myself if I engineered the list so this would be number 9 or if it just worked out that way. I don't know. It's probably a little bit of both. I am late to the game on the Locked Tomb series, and I regret that. But I kind of blame the marketing and some of the discussions that surround these books. And when I say the marketing, I mean like the marketing on the book. I think it's a little deceptive. So right here on the back, goofy and gleaming, a profane Daria in space. I mean, that sounds pretty cool, but I don't think that that's what is in between these covers. Like right here on the front, lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space. It's not in space, first of all. It's on Earth. And I think that these get some of the like attitude of Gideon a little bit, but it's missing a lot of what actually is going on in this book. And if the marketing was more tuned to that, I think I would have been more apt to pick it up. The thing that I really liked about this is kind of like a book like Dune. It's set in a world that just has so much history. There's so much lore. There's so much stuff that has already happened in the Locked Tomb that you don't really know about. You're just seeing the effects of it and how characters are operating in that world. And it's your job to kind of unpack that based on the interpersonal relationships and interactions between the characters in the book and the evidence that we have available to us in things like appendices. So there are also, like Dune, there are appendices that have descriptions of the different houses that operate in the Locked Tomb series, and communiques that have gone around between some, like the military houses, stuff like that. This was great, and I'm very, very much looking forward to moving on to Harrow and Nona this year. Number 8 is Shigidi and the Brass Head of Obalufon by Wole Talabi, a criminally underrated and underread book from 2023. The premise is pretty simple. It's a heist on the British Museum. That sounds pretty good. Like, who wouldn't want to read that? But the layer on top of it takes it to the next level. The heist is being perpetrated by gods. Shigidi is an Orisha nightmare god, and he is paired up with a succubus. And Talabi has a very interesting way of telling the story. This may not work for everybody. It's a little non-linear, so it's basically every other chapter is straight ahead, moving the main narrative forward, and then the in-between chapters go back in time, sometimes like a few days or an hour, sometimes like thousands of years, to describe how Shigidi and his companion got to be where they are. I think that this was just like super fun. I read it in just like 2 quick sittings. I'm really excited for whatever Wole Talabi has next, and I really hope that he's able to turn this into a longer running urban fantasy series. I think it's just wonderful. Number 7 is Mistletoe and Mishigas by M.A. Wardell. Full disclosure, I am friends with Matt, the author of this book, but I bought this book myself and I would buy it 10 more times. It is so sweet, so spicy, so fun. 2023 was the year that I really got into reading romance, particularly romance, and this was the height. This was the peak. I love it. This might be a book that I reread every holiday season every year. It is the story of, as I put it, big boy and small man. Big boy Theo is the janitor in the school that small man Sheldon works at. They're both gay. It's kind of grumpy sunshine. There's fake dating in this book. Sheldon needs a date to his ex's wedding, and Theo wants to get his parents off of his back, so they, have a pretend relationship, and then, things evolve from there. It's a very Jewish book. Theo and his family are Jewish, and they kind of bring Sheldon into that. It's just so sweet, and it was so refreshing, and like I said, it was like pretty spicy. I just adored it. I love this book to bits. I will read anything that Matt puts out there. Number 6 is a very important and impactful novella called Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. Minor Detail is a story in 2 parts. The first part takes place in the late 1940s after the Nakba. We follow an Israeli soldier as he's kind of going about his daily activities with the troops that he commands, and they run across a Palestinian girl who things don't go well for her, and she disappears. And then the second part of the story, we follow a modern day Palestinian woman who becomes aware of this historical event, and she focuses on this minor detail that she and this girl had the same, were born on the same day. And she becomes obsessed with this story and wants to get to the bottom of it. And that leads her out of her home in the West Bank down to where the events in the 1940s occurred. And we see all of these parallels between their lives, and really a searing indictment of the conditions that Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza live in. Phenomenally good, short, a kind of difficult read. Minor Detail was also nominated for an award last year in Germany, and that got canceled. And that cancellation brought a lot of readers and bookish people online to promote this book and to kind of spread awareness about it. And I'm really glad that happened, because I never would have known about it if not for that. And it's one of the best pieces of literary fiction that I've ever read. A really impactful book and a really important book. Another really impactful and important book, although not short, this is well over 500 pages, is Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is a history of the Sackler family. They're the family that own Purdue Pharma, the company that created and marketed OxyContin. Patrick Radden Keefe is probably my favorite working nonfiction author today. His magazine features in the New Yorker and books like this and Say Nothing are just like so good. He's such a good reporter, and he also just has quite a talent for storytelling. He was able to weave like over 100 years of history of the Sackler family together into one coherent narrative that really does have a perspective that's grounded in the facts. It's not like it's not a hit piece. It's not a hatchet job. He charts the rise of this family from kind of nothing, and how they built, but then started to accumulate power and money and influence, and how as they accumulated more and more, they just became more increasingly inward looking and focused on their internal problems and squabbles, and weren't thinking about the lives of the people that they were marketing, what they saw as just a product. But, OxyContin has killed, and the opioid epidemic is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. And the Sackler family is directly responsible for the rise of the opioid epidemic. And Empire of Pain is just required reading to understand not just the broad history of how that happened, but also the very specific personal history that led us to this place that we're in today. Just a great read. Number 4 is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monocle Blackgoose. This is the dragon book of 2023. I am not down with Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. These are the dragons. These are the good dragons. Maybe I just feel that way because this just really speaks to my more nerdy sensibilities, but what I really liked about what Blackgoose did is how she so embraced the idea of creating an alternative history and an alternate world to set this in. So she starts from the premise that dragons and magic related to dragons have existed alongside humanity, maybe for all of history, or perhaps dragons emerged at some point, before this book was set, around, I think, the 1840s. But she explores that in such great depth. So you can tell that she put in a lot of world building and creative energy to thinking, if dragons had existed, how would the world be different? And it would be very different. Everything about the world would be different, and everything is different in the world of To Shape a Dragon's Breath. It is familiar, but different. We also have just a wonderful main character with Anakus, an indigenous girl from an island where dragons have returned after a generation or so of them being separated from dragons. Colonizing forces from Europe have come to what is today the United States, although the politics of To Shape a Dragon's Breath are very different from how the actual history of the world went down. And Anakus, the main character, finds a dragon's egg, and she is going to be the first dragon rider of her people in a generation or two. But in order to do that, she has to engage with the colonial structure as it exists in in what is today the United States. But Anakus is she's a strong character, and she doesn't break when exposed to and put into dialogue with this colonial power, but she does adapt in some ways that it's just very satisfying to see her navigate that, and to see as Blackgoose is setting up what is going to be like a really truly epic series. This is a fantastic first book, and I'm really excited for where it's going to go. My number 3 book is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is one of, if not the best memoirs that I've ever read. The only way for me to explain it is to just show a couple of the chapter titles. So here we have Dreamhouse as a Lesson in the Subjunctive and Dreamhouse as Fantasy. In the Dreamhouse is Carmen Maria Machado's memoir of her time in and out of a very toxic relationship, and she describes the history of that relationship through the lens of a number of literary and cinematic genres and tropes and conventions. I'm pretty sure she wrote this while she was in a master's program working on an MFA, and it kind of is creative writing as therapy, but I think she just knocked it out of the park. It's so honest, but also deeply engaged with what literature can be. This is a couple years old, and Carmen Maria Machado does have some older short stories and new stuff that she's working on. She has a great Substack. She's definitely an auto-buy author for me now. I will read anything that she puts out. I thought this was just fantastic. Number 2 is Camp Damascus by the one, the only, Love is Real author Chuck Tingle. If you think you don't know Chuck Tingle, you do. You do know Chuck Tingle. He is the author of such important pieces of literature as the Space Raptor Butt Invasion trilogy and Pounded in My Butt by my book, Pounded in My Butt by my book, Pounded in My Butt by my book, etc. Yes, Chuck Tingle is that pink bag hooded author of mostly erotica, but he also writes more standard genre fare. That's not fair to erotica. Especially since 2023 has been a year that I've been reading so much more romance. Like, I truly believe that the Tinglers are good literature and important in their own way, but Camp Damascus is Chuck's first novel-length piece of non-erotica, and it's a horror novel that is centered around a Christian gay conversion camp with demons, and it is just fantastically well written. It's a great story. It's very spooky. Chuck just has a way of reaching into the emotional core of people and situations and bringing them out, even in unusual and out there situations. And that's what he does with Camp Damascus. Also, the cover art is just gorgeous. All right, before we get to my number one best book of 2023, I said that we were going to have a few special category awards. I think a lot of people have categories like these, if not these exact categories. These were books that didn't quite make the list, but I want to give some unique recognition to based on their contributions to literature. In the category of book with the biggest man-baby wannabe scientist who runs away from all of his responsibilities, not into the arms of his cousin wife, Elizabeth, but instead into the arms of his roommate, Henry, Frankenstein. In the category of best bulleted list and tables-based biography of a founding father, You Never Forget Your First by Alexis Coe. In the category of best romantasy based on astrology, which makes a strong argument for why everyone should be in therapy, A Circle of Stars by Craig Montgomery. In the category of book with the best handy in the Old West and also zombies, Gold Rush by Chris Williams. In the category of best butt stuff in a closet, Teacher of the Year by M.A. Wardell. And in the category of best butt stuff in the White House, Enemies of the State by Tal Bauer. And finally, my number one favorite read of 2023 is My Government Means to Kill Me by Rashid Newson. If you didn't know that My Government Means to Kill Me was a piece of fiction, you would believe that this is a memoir of a black gay man in New York in the 1980s. I don't know how Newson did it. It is just so wonderfully written. The way he writes the main character, Trey, is so immediate and gripping. Trey is real. He has flaws. He learns and grows. It's incredible to see him essentially get off the bus in New York from the Midwest, not knowing anybody, not knowing anything, and then see his progression, mostly a political progression, as he gets involved in like gay liberation politics in New York in the 80s, and see him swept through all of this and become a stronger and stronger person along the way as he encounters all of this real history. It's just fantastic. Newson also does this thing where he uses footnotes to very great effect. So it takes place in the 1980s, and someone like me, who wasn't born until 1987, is not familiar with a lot of culture, particularly like queer black culture in New York City in the 1980s. So whenever he references a specific magazine or a club or some concept that a modern day reader might not be familiar with, he puts in a footnote. Like here on page 112, we have footnote 37 about Mineshaft. Mineshaft, 1976 to 1985, was a cavernous members-only sex club and leather bar catering to the community of gay men who engage in BDSM role-playing. Famed photographer Robert Mapplethorpe was a Mineshaft member, and hundreds of his photos document the sexual breadth achieved inside the club. Great, great writing. I actually think this is quite an important book as well, because there are truths that you can tell in fiction that nonfiction are never going to be able to achieve. My Government Means to Kill Me kind of wraps up a lot of what it meant to be a gay person in New York in the 80s in a way that is just, like I said, it's immediate. It just feels like you're there. And it relates a lot of real history. There are many real historical figures in this. Fred Trump is a fairly significant character in this book. This is a book that I've thought about a lot since I read it last year. I will continue to think about it a lot in the years to come, and I probably will return to it many times. I can't more highly recommend it. It is my number one book of 2023. It also won in the category award of best butt stuff, political. These were my favorite reads in 2023. Congratulations to them and all the other winners, and good luck to all of the various butt stuff category contenders in 2024. There's already a lot of them on my bookshelf.